All right, everyone. Trump and Xi, I guess, had a good enough meeting at the G whatever it is now summit, and they've agreed to have an armistice on the U.S.-China trade war because the new tariffs that would have taken effect, I mean, at some point it would negatively impact the U.S. economy. Like right now, it's slowed growth slightly, but we're still churning ahead. China really has gotten the fuzzy end of the lollipop for sure on the issue. But that doesn't mean that Trump wants to go further unless he has to, because it's a shitty idea. It's a crazy idea. Getting into an all-out trade war with China, like beyond the tariffs that we are already slapping each other with during negotiations, would be horrible for the entire world's economy. If you're not careful, you can trigger a Great Depression. And even though we would come out as victorious, what's there to be victorious over? A downturned economy. Trump gets kicked out. The Democrats come in. They're terrible at solving economic issues. You saw Obama prolonged the Great Recession. FDR prolonged the Great Depression. It always seems like we end up getting big spenders and high taxers in the wake of an economic problem that's invariably caused by regulation but blamed on the free market that doesn't even exist in the components that are spoken of. A socialist, or in Obama's case, just a generic leftist, comes in and prolongs the problem while haranguing about how things are now different. And then somebody comes in and restores American hope and confidence, and then we have a brief period of reprieve before we go through the next boom and bust cycle caused by big government. What we need to do is get government out of as much as possible. We need to constrain it far, far more. We need more constitutional protection. We need to extend it as much as possible. We need to lower taxes as much as possible, repeal as many regulations as possible, and get as many government bureaucrats out of the job as possible. The problem is, I know, when I make a YouTube video, considering the number of people that watch me, some of you are government workers. Hell, there's probably politicians watching that. I hate to say it, but I want most of you to be unemployed temporarily and have to join the private marketplace. If your job's important, it'll spring up in the private marketplace. And to tell the truth, most government workers, they make a decent amount of money, and you should have some savings. And I'm not trying to be like, oh, fuck you. I'm not trying to be an asshole about it. It's just that the economy at large would grow more robust. You'd get a better job probably down the road anyway. Especially since most government jobs, they require specific training. You're not a dumbass, so don't worry about it too much. Little inconvenience now for a long-term gain. See, regulation is more like short-term gain, long-term pain. You're like, oh, we regulated this thing and now workers have more protections. Oh, the economy downturned? Oh, fuck us. It was the private marketplace's fault. It's good to see that the Xi can be reasonable, because Trump had already extended sort of the olive branch and said, let's restart negotiations, and it was stalled. There were no negotiations ongoing. It was frozen. Now all of a sudden they're ongoing again. I guess basically Trump just had to say, okay, the next layer of tariffs we're not going to apply. We're going to repeal the last layer of tariffs too, and China repealed theirs temporarily. I think that's good because, collectively, the U.S. and China are the largest economies in the world. Combined dwarf, however many countries that come after, a significant proportion of all the world's economic capabilities. We have two of the most powerful militaries. We have some of the greatest force projection, the U.S. specifically navally. China is increasing their capabilities, at least within the region, branching out throughout the Indian Ocean especially. It would be a bad idea if we were openly hostile towards one another. And fucking both Trump and Xi understand this. It's not like they're clueless about it. And Trump, I think, is uniquely qualified to wage this kind of negotiation. Can you imagine Obama trying to negotiate an entire 100% trade overhaul with the Chinese? Can you imagine if Obama had tried that? If Bush had tried it, it would have been funny because he would have been bumbling. And he would have done that thing like the first visit to China there where he tried, I think, to push the door and he had to pull it or something. And he looked dumbfounded. And the Chinese thought that was hilarious. I mean, he just came off as disarming. Even though he's really cold, calculated, full-blooded, psychopathic mass murderer. But, he played the part of a dumbass well. Bush did. Clinton, maybe he could have negotiated things with China. But, I mean, back then there was more hostility. Back then, the U.S. government actually bothered to criticize the nation of China. The last few administrations did that relatively less. You heard relatively little outcry about human rights, about, child slavery, the sex trade in China, currency manipulation, hacking and cyber terrorism, which is what it is that China conducts. The Great Canon of China, the idea that China can instantly weaponize its whole intranet to knock out companies in the U.S. if it wants. Like, literally just send a massive surge of data that just fucking fries their servers. China does all of these things. And nobody wanted to talk about it. Like Hillary Clinton is pressed on it. She doesn't want to talk about it. When the Democrats are asked what's the greatest threat, only a couple of them said China. A couple of them said Iran, and I think the rest all said Russia. Or I think one person sarcastically remarking it was Trump. But I mean, that's the mentality of the left today. They don't understand. They can't see the forest for the trees in many cases. They're looking at all of these boogeymen all around them that they've concocted in their minds. China's sitting there openly manipulating its currency and waging a trade war against us. That was sparked in part by the fact that they've been abusing us incrementally on trade for now decades and decades. Trump tries to solve the problem. They're all rooting against him. We've got a Democratic Party that by and large is rooting for China to win a tariff war against the United States because they don't want to give Trump credit for doing what Trump is best at, negotiating. He's the negotiator in chief. He's a money president. He's not a war president. In virtually all aspects of foreign policy, when Trump needs to use force, he hasn't dropped bombs. He doesn't say, I'm going to send troops in or press the little red button. He says, I'm going to tariff you. I'm going to take your money. I'm going to abuse you the same way you're abusing us. And the U.S. is in a unique position. Virtually all the countries that we do business with, it's lopsided in trade. That is, we've never tariffed them, we don't embargo them, we don't intervene in things, but they do. They manipulate currency, or they enact a tariff or protectionism in some way. They block some U.S. good. So we can just say, oh, we'll just do exactly what you've been doing to us. Oh my God, no, you can't do that. Here, we'll give you some relief. Now, it doesn't solve the problem completely, but if you solve 20 or 30% of the problem across the board with just the major trading partners we're with, Canada and Mexico, that's on the table. Congress has to ratify the USMCA. They need to fucking do that and stop dragging their heels. He got German automotive. That's a big thing. And now he's going for the jugular for China. If he does that, he will have solved a significant amount of our trade imbalance, of our lack of productivity in heavy industry, and a million other things. He'll have finally solved these problems. He's trying to also go for the holy grail of immigration and negotiations between Israel and Palestine and the two Koreas. He's obviously a big thinker. He's got 2 successes under his belt. He's got 1 more underway, and then he's got a couple that are on hold at the moment. The Chinese trade deal until literally yesterday, and then, Israel-Palestine. I wouldn't expect he can solve that. The world's foremost issue, the fact that these 2 minuscule nations in the Middle East that happen to control a lot of regional trade and travel don't like each other. That people there constantly fire rockets and bombs and shit at each other. Rather sad. I mean, it's like, firing off missiles out in the desert, not the most productive thing you could be doing with your life. But I don't know. I guess it's become a pastime of sorts. It's like here, the pastime is shitposting on the internet. In some countries, the pastime is drinking or soccer hooliganism or something. There it's making rockets, I guess, firing them off. It's like here on the 4th of July when the rockets... It must be weird to be in a country where when you hear explosions and stuff, it's not fireworks or someone shooting, at a gopher or something in their garden. I hear gunshots and fireworks and shit all the time here, and I just ignore it because it's like it's natural. Can you imagine, though, you're like in Israel or on the Korean border, you start hearing explosions, you probably duck and cover. That's about all. Peace out.